Okay, so what we're looking at and what this is the Google Doodle for February 4th, 2022. And it's a presentation of sort of, I guess, fable-like images of representations of individuals performing in the 2022 Olympic Winter Games in Beijing. And you can kind of tell that this is sports related based on the fact that all of these animal figures are doing things that relate to sports activities that are performed in winter, and particularly in the snow. You have a rabbit ice skater. You have, I'm not sure what these creatures are exactly, some kind of squirrel, or I don't really, honestly, I don't know. But the bobsledders or the luge riders on this sort of makeshift primitive log-like luge are some kind of creature, and then you have the snowboarding leopard or tiger, perhaps he's a tiger, and you have a goose, who's doing a ski jump apparently, and then you have what is this called? Curling. This must be a mouse or a rat, and some kind of weasel who is who's playing hockey apparently. Anyway, to clarify, if you click on the image, you get the explanation of the Google Doodle, which is the Olympic Games, Beijing 2022, and the reason is because the opening for the games is today, February 4th, 2022. So it also, which some of us aren't altogether interested in, and I guess some of us still are, and I suppose there are reasons and rationales to feel either way. I understand that Zhang Yimou, the great Chinese filmmaker Zhang Yimou, had something to do with the opening ceremony and either has organized a part of it or is part of the presentation, and that's kind of interesting in and of itself. He's always been one of my favorite filmmakers. Other than that, I'm sorry, but I'm not really all that interested in. What I am interested in is, of course, the fact that this is Black History Month, the fourth day of our Black History Month, and that it's the birthday of someone who one could only refer to as the part of the royalty of the civil rights movement in the United States of America, and that's Rosa Parks, who was born on February 4th, 2000. I've done it again. February 4th, 1913. And on the 100th anniversary of Rosa Parks' birth on February 4th, 2000, as I was going to say, 13, the United States Postal Service put out a commemorative stamp, honoring the memory, because Rosa Parks was, no longer with us at the time of what would have been her 100th birthday, February 4th, 2013. The President of the United States was Barack Obama, the first and only African-American president that we have had in this country. And this set of forever stamps was released by the U.S. Postal Service which is part of the United States government. And you know, I would have liked to have seen a Google Doodle of you know, honoring Rosa Parks, but honestly, I didn't expect to find one, and I have never, you know, I don't have the recollection of ever seeing one. So I did a Google search and to see if Google had ever honored Rosa Parks, and in fact, I found one image, which is this. Now, this image, it's of a bus, and then you see you know, this imagery of both white and African American children leaving the bus, and they're, you know, all holding hands, and they're you know, demonstrating all of the strides that the United States has made in its history in overcoming segregation and racial oppression, and this image of harmony. And but to me, it's not readily apparent that this is a reference to the event, which, you know, Rosa Parks is largely and famously known for, which was the December 1st, 1955. I have to be careful that I don't get the wrong dates. My mind is thinking of a lot of dates. I was thinking, you know, of the future of some of the presentations that I'm going to make, and on, you know, February 7th is one of those foci, and I want to do a piece on the African American, you know, student strikes in Madison, and I've been thinking about a lot of different dates, and, you know, and that particular date is 1969, and then I've been thinking about you know, a lot of dates in the 20th century, and yet my mouth and in a certain way, you know, my muscle memory has trained itself to say 2000, and switching back and forth between centuries and these considerations of themes that, you know, that are relevant to us today, is got the performance of my temporal memory working overtime. So I anticipate that I'm going to continue to make a number of verbal errors in recalling these dates, but the date that we're referring to here, which clearly is not represented by this image, clearly, like, this image marks the inheritance of those acts performed, you know, not only by Rosa Parks but other active participants in the civil rights movement in, you know, 1955 and beyond, right? But this image clearly seems to refer to, you know, some moment either, you know, in the 70s or beyond the 70s, and it honors, you know, Rosa Parks by making a claim that implicit claim, you know, that without the work and the sacrifices that she made, that we wouldn't have a scene like this of racial, you know, harmony and of equality. Now, it's interesting that, you know, still in this representation, you know, it's black and it's white, and that's not insignificant. I mean, and it's not insignificant for a number of reasons that relate to our space-time travel investigation. Whoopi Goldberg, just within the last few days, was censored, and And censorship is something that we've been addressing, both prior to and in particular in relationship to Black History Month this year, because so many right-wing conservatives have come out with books that they want to ban that relate to African American history and African American the continuation of the struggle for civil rights. That images like this seem to kind of like gloss over, like that those accomplishments are set in stone and they're made, and these rights can no longer be taken away, and this is the kind of harmony we have. But even within this representation of this kind of fantasy of these gains that were made, and I say fantasy because there's so much being taken away from us that belong to our rights today, on the part of legislatures, state legislatures that are curtailing voting rights with their restrictions, and state and local government officials who are attempting, to ban and censor representations of diversity and the struggle for equality in terms of rights, in terms of economics, in terms of resources, for citizens, across the United States, and to curtail, certain aspects of the 14th Amendment, which is, often referred to as the Citizens' Rights Amendment, and it relates to what we'll talk about in relationship to Rosa Parks, because the case that she made against the segregated bus laws that she was arrested for violating on December 1st, 1955, largely rested on the violation of those, the violation of the 14th Amendment that those laws participated in, right? So, and it's interesting too, because although the 14th Amendment, I mean, we can get to some of that, and probably some of it is an aside, but in addition to guaranteeing certain equality of rights in access to resources, the 14th, for citizens of the United States, the 14th Amendment also makes a stipulation that anyone who attempts to or participates in acts of insurrection against the United States government and the democracy of America, shall their right to hold office shall be removed from them. So, in the 14th Amendment, which is being challenged by the United States Supreme Court system today, and if you think that's not true, go back and take a look at what the basis for example, Brown versus Board of Education was a 14th Amendment issue. Roe versus Wade was a 14th Amendment issue, and the Supreme Court is very much like chiseling away at decisions like Roe versus Wade, perhaps in the future at decisions like Brown versus the Board of Education, because, and I say that it's not in any way paranoid, the states have already enacted numerous laws, right? Like banning and curtailing educators' ability to teach about the history of the United States, and in particular things like segregation, things like these laws that individuals like Rosa Parks struggled so fearlessly and courageously to challenge and to do away with, that involves segregation, but more than segregation. And and all of those issues that belong to this particular amendment, the Citizens Rights Amendment, are very much being challenged in the Supreme Court today. But I was going to say that it's interesting that within, I think it's the third provision or the third section of the 14th Amendment that says anyone who participates in an act of insurrection or rebellion against the United States government, shall no longer be eligible to serve office. And so many, right? So many of the January 6th Republicans that in both the Senate and the House, were never called on that. Like, never called upon. we never looked, at their right to hold office, right? And so it's totally a prosecutable issue, and it even belongs to the Constitution, because once an amendment is made to the Constitution, that amendment becomes part of our Constitution. So all of these senators and members of the House of Representatives, right, who participated in this and who continue to support this act of insurrection, like, are potentially removable as part of what we believe to be our Constitution via the 14th Amendment. And yet, no one has prosecuted this. And the other thing is that, clearly, right, Donald Trump continues to promise that he'll run for president once again in 2024, when he clearly no longer has the right to, right, under the Constitution. And that to me is very interesting as well, that it belongs to the 14th Amendment, which I guess in more than one way is being chiseled at and eroded by the right-wing flunkies who have taken over the Supreme Court. So back to the image, the construction of race as this binary opposition between black and white is, I think, something that the discourse that Whoopi Goldberg was recently censored for produces, when she stated that obviously, like, incomprehensibly, ignorantly, almost, to some of us, but the construct is there, right? The construct is in this Google image that the German, Holocaust, the Nazi Holocaust, and the destruction of human life under the Nazi regime was not about race. It was about man's inhumanity to man, and it was about man's inhumanity to man, but it utilized the construct of race to perform these acts of horror and terror that go beyond what is in fact imaginable. And the fact that isn't obvious, perhaps, is also implicit in this image that race in the American imaginary is often constructed as a black and white issue, and who are missing here in this image. I mean, I can't really tell by the figure in the front, but I can certainly tell by the third figure here and the two African American figures, right? Perhaps this figure leading the way represents someone that the construct of race doesn't designate as white, but it's indeterminate. But what we don't obviously see in the image is a representation of Native American child, or an Asian American child, or a Mexican American child, or someone that still, right, is designated within the constructions that raciality, designate, as other than this construct of white, but that but also who clearly is not, you know, designated by the construct of blackness, right? So race in the American imaginary, and race is always an imaginary, right? Like, we're all human beings, right? So we all, in one way or another, we're all Africans because we all originated in Africa. And then, you know, either our ancestors moved here, or they moved there, or they didn't move at all, right? And then, you know, because of our environments, like, or any reasonable person understands that because of our environments, we adapted to those environments, and then differences arose, right? But the construct of race, particularly as it relates to hierarchizations of either cultural values or you know, embodied physical genetics, right? That don't have to do with. I mean, this is what, you know, W.B. Du Bois was all about, you know, because there were arguments that of racial superiority, you know, as late as the work that he was doing in the 20s and 30s, and he had to argue that, you know, that these you know, discrepancies in physical health, discrepancies in you know, cultural production were all a matter of you know, resources and access, and this is still an issue, you know, right? Like, you know, we're still trying to provide, you know, equity of resources in health and well-being, and that's part of what the dynamic of you know, choosing health and well-being as the theme for Black History Month this year is, but race, particularly as it was, you know, constructed around, you know, these hierarchies to justify extracting involuntary labor and stealing property and seeing others as property, you know, was, you know, always, you know, of course, in a cultural imaginary, and nothing more than a cultural imaginary. And you know, in that sense, Whoopi Goldberg was right, because there is no such thing that isn't a cultural imaginary that's race, right? So it was about man's inhumanity to man, because we're all the same humanity, you know, and but you know, obviously that's also not really what she meant, because I guess, if I'm correct in arguing the imagery here, the construct, right, that she began with was that you know, race is about being, you know, black or white, and that the Holocaust, you know, couldn't have been racially motivated because it wasn't about being black. When clearly, if you've studied Nazi propaganda at all, or read anything about, you know, the history of authoritarian ideologies in the early 20th century, and the history of the pogroms, you know, that preceded it and fed into it, it was always about constructs of race, and race was always used as the legitimization of acts of historical violence against Jews, and of course, you know, other, you know, European minorities as well, including you know, the Roma and others. But in this image, going back, you know, to our day, because, you know, we really want to turn to Rosa Parks, it's not at all clear to me, if you saw this image, that it refers to Rosa Parks. And if you had clicked on it, then you would see this 55th anniversary of Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her seat to a white man who wanted to sit where she was sitting, and so that's interesting too. The number 55. So the 55th anniversary of an event that occurred on December 1st, 1955. And then I did further research, and I couldn't find any other images or doodles, Google doodles, that had referred to Rosa Parks. So going back to today's, I would have preferred a Google doodle of Rosa Parks. However, I also understand the significance for some individuals of the opening of the 2022 Olympics on this day. And but the Winter Olympics doesn't always, the Winter Olympics opening ceremony doesn't always occur on February 4th. But Rosa Parks' birthday always occurs on February 4th. So I was surprised to see that other than this doodle, which didn't occur on a February 4th, but on a December 1st, there were no examples of Google doodles for any February 4ths that included images that looked more like this, and I was disappointed by that fact, and that disappointment, I suppose, is a place to begin, and just like this image, of this scene of racial harmony is a place to begin, and again, when did this happen? This happened in 2010. All right, so let me frame this another way. The stamp that we're looking at, right? This commemorization stamp was issued on the 100th anniversary of Rosa Parks' birthday, which is a nice, timely synchronization. But it was also, so 2013 was also within the presidency of Barack Obama, the only African-American president that the United States has ever had, right? Which his presidency lasted. It was a two-term presidency, and it lasted from 2009 until 2017. The beginning, you'll recall the infamous beginning of 2017 when America inaugurated the presidency of its first, fully, I would say, fully fascist president and fully anti-democratic president. And we saw what the results of 4 years of a fascist, anti-democratic president actually resulted in. But anyway, so this is 2013. This is within the Obama presidency, and the Google, right, that doesn't even include an image of Rosa Parks, who I think I refer to as one of our royalty of the civil rights movement, right? Often called even the mother of the civil rights movement. This was presented by Google. The Google Doodle was presented by Google on December 1st, the 51st anniversary of her bus protest, and that's 2010, right? So already 12 years ago, but also part of within the presidency of Barack Obama. So what am I saying? So I'm saying that I guess I'm questioning, like, do you have to have an African American president before you start beginning to honor and memorialize, Rosa Parks? And I would hope the answer would be no, but clearly the answer is yes, at least, on this level. Although I have to say that there are some celebrations, this year as well, and there have always been celebrations, outside of this kind of mainstream, right? Like mainstream in the sense of government sponsored, that is the United States Post Office, or mainstream in terms of like this gigantic industry that is Google, that more or less regulates the information in one way or another that is available to us, as its name implies. This nearly, not infinite number, but infinite as far as the human imagination is concerned. What I mean by that is, go to Immanuel Kant's formulation of the beautiful and the sublime, right? The beautiful is something that we can see or experience through some other sense here, and all of the aspects of the elements of what we're seeing or hearing or experiencing through some sense, our mind and our consciousness and our apparatus of perception can organize, and we can actually perceive it as an example of the harmonious and the continuous and the pleasant. And that's the beautiful. And the sublime is this thing that is so big or so vast or so overwhelming or so terrifying that human consciousness can no longer, one can conceive of it as an abstraction, but one can no longer perceive of it in its totality, right? So you can conceive of infinity, and that has a kind of vastness of the sublime, but you can't hold it. And Google is one of those numbers, right, that you can't hold in your perceptive consciousness. And in a sense, it's a self-realizing phenomenon. We can't. The vastness of its control of information is not even, you can't make a chart or perceive it. You can only really imagine the hugeness, right, of this particular vehicle of the dissemination of information under capitalism. And for those kinds of engines, for those kinds of engines of information consumption and dissemination, we apparently have seen two examples of instances in which Rosa Parks has actually been recognized either on the anniversary of what would be her birth date, or the anniversary of this momentous event on December 1st, 1955. So this is a long introduction for what I want to do today. Hopefully I do it within the confines of this day. It looks like she's pushing a wheel here, almost the first figure here, and hopefully I can respond to some of the information, some of the material information that is available, regarding, Rosa Parks and and tie it into some of these other issues of, censorship and the recent deterioration, of the government's, particularly the right, but a failure, on the part of our, U.S. government overall, to defend the groundbreaking strides that civil rights leaders and participants like Rosa Parks, made in the 50s and beyond into the 60s, and yet, we still idealize, in certain ways, the image of our progress, even though these disparities, continue to exist. And I've been thinking about all of this, of course, in relationship to, here's an example of one of these banned book lists that's made by these, conservative ideologues, and look how much, it has to do with constructions of race. And these are all presumably books that, look at race in order to do what I'm doing right now, to attempt to understand race as an ideological construct, right? A reification of a way of sorting and assigning values to different cultures and aspects of humanity, and that the idea of race is always a construct, and it's a construct that is deployed in the United States and continues to be deployed, even in images that pretend to be honoring individuals who spent their lives struggling against racism. So if you look at this list, and one can't deny like the violence of police in America. So banning a book that protests the reality of police violence in modern America is a statement about silencing the protests against racism. So these bans, are essentially banning the same kinds of acts that were committed by individuals like Rosa Parks, right? Telling us that if you're Rosa Parks today, you can't publish, you can't speak, your books will not be found in school libraries. These are all books like that. Now, they're not all about race. Some of them are about sexual identification and sexual and gender preference, and some of them are about women's reproductive rights issues. But most of them relate in one way or another to the 14th Amendment. And so in doing so, whether it's about, equal rights for, and representation for homosexual males or lesbian women or transgender individuals or Native Americans or African Americans or people with disabilities, whatever category it falls under in this set of banned books, it's still a 14th Amendment right. So you have to see these censorship acts and these bans as challenges to, if not explicit challenges of the 14th Amendment, implicit and insidious challenges to the 14th Amendment, and therefore, challenges to the very foundations that were the source for individuals like Rosa Parks to make changes in the institutions and the values and the laws, you know, which permitted these equalities and, in fact, you know, enforced these equalities. See, there's an example there. And these are all 14th Amendment issues. And then at the very bottom, there's I recall seeing a lot of, there's Roe versus Wade, that's 14th Amendment. And, all right. Anyway, so this is a very long opening, but I'm going to have to begin another piece because the last few days I had so much trouble getting onto YouTube my lengthy initial discussion, which exceeded an hour, and that was the problem. It was too long for my internet service to handle. So I'll stop here, and we may or may, it'll take a while for me to get this online probably, so we may have to exceed February 4th synchrony, and I may need to talk more explicitly and in detail about material relating more specifically to Rosa Parks on February 5th.